Welcome back to The Pride Has Spoken. My name is Grace, but of course I'm not alone. I'm here with my lovely co-host. First, Matt Scott. Matt, how you doing?
Happy to be here. Happy Pride while we're still allowed to say it with it being accurate. How are you doing, Grace?
I'm doing great. Sad that Pride Month is over. As we're recording this is the last day of Pride.
Yes, but you know
Yeah.
what? Happy that we're joined by the one, the only, Dr. Evvie Jagoda. Ding! I wish I need a bell still.
Yeah.
Evvie,
Hey
how are you doing?
friends. Hey friends. Yeah, happy Pride. I mean, Pride is a state of mind.
I agree.
You know, like
Yeah.
I don't think just because the month ends. Now, I feel like honestly, it's like this month is like it's like Pride for like that everybody gets to see. And I think the rest of the year, it's kind of like we're doing Pride
Secret
ourselves.
Pride.
Secret
Yeah.
Pride.
Yes,
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Secret Pride, but anyone is invited if they know the know the secret knock, you know.
We
I
can't
don't know.
tell you the
I'm
secret
tired.
knock. Yeah, it's early in the morning.
It's like there's a special code, may or may not involve hankies, who knows?
Yes.
But we keep rolling.
Exactly.
No, it's been very fun. We've had great conversations all month long, as you've probably seen in your podcast title. Today we're talking to Todd Herzog. That is, when we were like, "What about Todd?" I was like, "Yeah, maybe we could ask Todd, sure." And then Evvie reached out, and Todd said yes, and I freaked out.
Todd is so nice. I feel like Todd is a yes person, you know,
Okay.
in the sweetest, most generous way, especially considering, you know, he, you know, is a winner from some time ago. So yeah, I'm so glad that he said yes and that you two are going to talk to him.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, Survivor China is basically my favorite season, or one of my few favorite seasons, and just to like watch that and see Todd and talking about LGBTQ plus representation, like the fact that Todd was just able to win and also just shine as a character on our TV screens. Not even like in a stereotypical or limited way, but like in a really positive way, I think, paved the way. Todd definitely paved the way in so many ways.
Yeah, and I think it's very fun, the synergy of, like, we're not talking to folks from Survivor 44, but Jam, the first LGBTQ winner since Todd. So there's some fun synergy there, as we'll chat with Todd about how that feels, that there's such a big gap. I remember saying that to somebody. I was like, yeah, we're interviewing Todd as the first LGBT winner, and they're like, really, that long? It's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's the way it goes sometimes, you know. Survivor's a hard game to win. Yeah,
it's real.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm very excited for that conversation. It should be very fun. But we've had such great conversations all month long. We started off with Carla, and then Hi and Missy, which that was an excellent conversation. It's been so lovely.
So fun. I feel like my favorite part of all these, which we knew from the last season, is just like you just get to see such different dimensions of these people versus just who they were on the show. I mean, Missy, it's just like, if you thought you knew Missy from watching Island of the Idols, and you're just wrong. You're definitely wrong. You're missing some huge pieces of her wonderful personality. And yeah, if you haven't listened to that one, like, please go do it. And it's funny. It's like she was like really serious seeming on the show, and then it was so fun in life. And I feel like Hi gave like his like social media vibe is kind of like more like silly vibes, and or like, you know, very like he's got a little sass online, which obviously he has in life also, but also like had such like serious profundity also, you know what I mean, in his interviews, talking about like, you know, divisiveness in America and things, you know. It's just like really cool and special. And then Carla just getting to be like, yeah, like talking about bringing her full self. I my favorite part of that one was, you know, I think maybe Grace being like, you know, were you nervous to be queer on the show? And she's like, no, like, no. You know, no, I was, you know, that's me, you know. And
I was completely projecting, I think, in the interview with Carla, because I don't know, I do feel like, even being out for a number of years, that I often I'll tell the story. I was telling Matt before we started, I went to a ton of pro wrestling events this past weekend, and I don't think it's always easy to get, like, pro wrestling sort of has this like culture and history of, you know, the lot of the like gay wrestling gimmicks for a long time have been like making fun of gay people. Like, it's rooted in homophobia, because wrestling has this like, you cheer the good guys and you boo the bad guys, and so they try and define something that like resonates. And for a long time, like, homophobia resonated. And so it was like the gay wrestler would be the bad guy, and he'd be like, you know, and he like locks somebody up. He's like then starting to grope them, and people are like booing, you know, all rooted in homophobia. And so there's a long history of that. And so being like a trans person and going to the, you know, you never know really whether that atmosphere, like what you're going to get. And wrestling has come a long way, and a lot of like smaller independent wrestling companies have done a really good job. And there's lots of really great like out gay wrestlers who are like get cheered at wrestling shows. But at this past weekend, I was like chatting with folks, and it was one of the first times I'd seen this person for a long time, and he was like, "Hey, I'm Hayden," and so but I get this moment of being like, what name do I give? Because like I think I could sort of pass if I give like a more masculine sounding, like my dead name, or I could be myself and give, you know, I could say my name, Grace. And so it was the first time that with this that I like was like, I said Grace, and he was like, "Oh, that's awesome. Cool. Like there's a bunch of us over there, like hang out. You want to come hang out?" And so then like we went to another show later that week because there's so much wrestling in town. So like, I think I projected on, like, I still have a lot of that, the way I navigate the world, even like in a very progressive country like Canada. Like I still think I navigate the world with a bit of like timidness in a way that like Carla does not. And it's so awesome. And I love it and respect it so much, because I don't like, there's this joke that I have with Brooklyn Zev where we talk about the when people, you're like, I'm trans, like, you're so brave, that's so amazing, you know. And so we joke about like getting that sentiment a lot, but then I still do believe that, like, I want to tell, when people come out, I want to tell them like, that's awesome, that's hard, like it is hard to come out. And so like to just see Carla be so fully authentically herself was something that like it really like took me, like when I was interviewing her, I really had to like check myself to be like, there are like very proud and like 100% of the time authentically proud like queer people. I was like, that's awesome. And something like, I want that to be possible in the world for every queer person. I want that possible for me, that I can just like say who I am, and also for like other people who might be more in my little world in terms of like their sometimes lack of self-confidence. I want everybody to have Carla's confidence.
Yeah, I mean, a thing that jumps out to me for that, Grace, is that there, you know, one, like we need stories of people who are like Carla, who are confident and who are like, yeah, I'm a badass, I've got this, to be like, oh, we're allowed to have that, we're allowed to do that. Like something that's been on my mind a lot, and I'm sure I'll plug it at the end of the podcast, is like this weird timing of like this LRG live reality game that I played, Survivor Philadelphia, where like I was one of the only 2 Black people, but also the only queer person, and it was like very white, and it was also before the new era of seasons came out. And like it's wild, because like I remember, kind of to your point, like it just like the shift in my brain of going from a world of like, oh, this is like, you know, I'm the only one, this is what Survivor is, there's only like a token queer person or bisexual person or whatever it might be, or like a token Black person. And then like we saw, you know, and this isn't exclusive to queer identities, but like we saw so much different representation come in the new era. I think like probably 2 weeks after we filmed that was when like your season came out, Evvie, right? And so just to be like, wow, doing this felt like so on an island to myself, to the point where and we talked about this a bit with High, I believe, which is like the need to like identify and share our stories when we feel like we're the only one, or like really represent a thing when we're the only person who's in the room to represent it, to go from like having to represent being a young Black queer person. And I remember like giving a speech and like telling people like, this is our experience, being underestimated, being overlooked, like all of that. And to like see a future where it's like, I don't even have to talk about it, because all the people around like get that or have that experience, which I think is more of what we're seeing in this new era of like the diversity being something where people could be seen. It could be so much more than just their identity, or their queer identity, or their racial, like race and ethnicity. Like, it's just awesome. And it does help us feel power. So it's been cool being on the journey with you, Grace, and seeing you like, oh my gosh, like it's Carla's story and inspiration. And then like just to see how High's moved about the world, Missy and the pasties and pastries, like, and then of course Todd.
Not pastry.
Yeah.
I've learned.
Amazing.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love a good croissant or a bagel. I need a bagel.
It's so funny. The other thing that happened when we were chatting with Hi, and we were interviewing for about an hour, and we stopped the record, but we kept talking a little bit.
Yeah.
And this conversation came up, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe we turned off this recording, because it was all about, I was talking about how easy it is for people of color to be labeled as the villain, and also queer people to be labeled as the villain, which is something I think will be interesting to talk about with Todd, because I think Todd has some of that too, where like he was seen as sort of this like sneaky player, really well respected, but also is a bit of the villain, right? And then the next week we were talking with Missy, and it comes up like immediately again, and so obviously that's an experience that resonates with lots of people, people of color. Who play on the show, but I'm so glad we're able to like off pod. That's the first thing we started chatting about with Hi, and then immediately comes up again with Missy, which is I'm so glad it came back up, because like it's so important for us to recognize. And that story that Missy tells about the person who came up to her and was like, "Oh, you do smile." I was like, so rude, but I'm sure that person doesn't realize. Actually, I'll tell another story of a scenario I had at a wrestling show, Matt. That this past weekend, there was there was a wrestler. This is on me. This is my bad.
Side note: subscribe to the Wrestling RHAP podcast. RHAPiswebsite.com/wrestling feed.
So there's a wrestler called Trish Adora. She's a pretty big name. She wrestles in one of the bigger companies, and she's been on TV and whatever. And she wrestled. And there was another wrestler named Kristara, who goes by the Sweet Pea, which is a great nickname. And she had wrestled early in the night. And at the end of the show is and indie wrestling is weird, where you like walk by and you just see wrestlers all the time, like the people who are in the ring. You just like see them, and you're like, that's so weird that you're like right there.
Yeah.
But Kristara was standing there, and I walked by, and I just had a like whatever, and I was like, "Oh, are you Trish Adora?" And she's like, "No." And I was like, "But she's awesome." And she was so nice in the way that she responded. And I walked by, and I was like, "Oh, that sucks. That sucks that I was in my brain. I did it where it was like they look alike, but they don't really look alike. But it's like my subconscious bias." So I sent her a message like the next day, being like, "Hey, I'm so sorry that happened." Like, and this is not to be like, "Look, I apologize," but it was like, just my point is that person who went up to Missy and was like, "Oh, you do smile." I'm sure they were not thinking that there's anything wrong with that statement, because that's the edit that Missy got on the show. But it does reinforce that, like, especially for us as white people, need to learn that like we do have subconscious like racism that is like within us because of the way our society is built, and we need to actually take action. And like I think that the show, Missy comes from sort of before the Survivor diversity campaign, and so I think and I hope that the show, but even Hi is talking about like how easy it is for him to be pinned, and he's talking about some of these other contestants that like he talked about Mike doing some of the same things he did, but Mike gets this like firefighter hero in it, and so I just think like I had to like sit and recognize like that really sucks for that person that I made that mistake. And it's a thing that happens, I think, to specifically people of color a lot, and need to like recognize like that was a thing that's like my subconscious, like that's racism from me, and need to like own it and correct it, because it's on me to do that, not the person. And so that story where Missy just talks about that person coming up, I like, that sucks so much that's the experience she has coming off of like the show, because she's incredible. Like that's her story, and how she sort of like lives her life is so cool and awesome. The pasties in particular is this like expression of freedom is like actually awesome. It's so cool.
And just as a general note, like, and this came up in my interview with Ricard last season also, of like, there's never a need to tell any person, including a Survivor player, like, I used to think this bad thing about you, but now I think this good thing about you. You could just actually say the good thing. Like that person could have said to Missy, like, you're so friendly. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's just like something else you can say. Please. And like no one ever needed to DM Ricard saying like, I used to hate you, but that blah, blah. And I got some of that too, of like, I used to think you hated all men and that I was never going to like you. But actually it was just like, you could just you could think that first part up here in the old head, and then get to the second part,
Yeah, sure. And I mean, it's like, and I think that maybe like even just to one, Evvie, such a great point and a note, and like I feel like that in itself is just something hopefully people could hold on to for life, not just with Survivor players. But the other thing, I just to like reflect on what we're saying, like one thing that's been so cool for me as like a queer person of color within these conversations has been like seeing the representation and like being like, yes, like Missy, I love that you're talking about this, and I love that you have this space to talk about this, all these different experiences you have related to Survivor, especially the ones not related to Survivor, because like, again, that representation matters, but it really matters, one, for people seeing us, but like two, or maybe it's like 1B for like us seeing ourselves and knowing that we're not alone in these experiences. And so I really hope that people like in hearing the more fully formed versions of each person we've interviewed, they're just like seeing that we are dynamic humans. And I think like looking ahead to next year when hopefully we're back doing this again, who knows? That's a long time from now, but there's so many more stories to tell too. And it's just been so awesome, like hearing from folks who are listening with the support and the love and like the community and how you relate. And this is like about us as like interviewers or podcasters in some sense, as podcasters are, and about the interviewees, the Survivor players. But like more than anything, this is about you, the listeners. Like we don't do this to listen to ourselves or just for the conversation.
Well,
it's really about, like, I mean,
just kidding. Yeah. I hate the sound of my own voice.
I was gonna. Well, yeah. I mean, I feel like that's like a common, relatable thing. We definitely don't do this for ourselves. And to tell us how much you love the sounds of our voices. But yes, like I mean, it's really about just like giving people something that's been missing for way too long. I can't believe that the Pride has spoken just wasn't a thing prior to a year ago. Like, isn't that ridiculous?
I'm going to find a message I got, and I will leave it anonymous because this person, I didn't get permission to I don't want to say their name. But I just wanted to share this. So I just wanted to write to tell you how much I appreciate the Pride has spoken, and the podcasting and advocacy in general. As someone who has struggled in their own queer journey and acceptance and feeling like my identity is valid, I really appreciate all of your honesty and openness. And it's been incredibly helpful in their own journey. And like to know that like somebody, so listen, if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know if I'm like queer, or I don't know, like, I don't, I'm figuring it out or whatever, you're valid. Whoever you are, who whatever label identity you think you might be, and try to figure it out. You can figure it out. You could, that's what, I just think like, for me, that's what like this is about, that people can see, Carla and Hai and Missy and Todd and see something in their journey and reflection. Because like, I mean, like the word queer, right? Like we talked about, the word queer, whether or not people love it. But part of what I like about it is that for me, like it did have this meaning of like being odd or different, right? Like that's like the initial like etymology of the word. And for me, I think that like what I have to see is like navigating the world as an LGBTQ person is different than navigating the world as like a cis heterosexual person, right? And so it is this weird thing that you have to figure out because our society is so like heteronormative. It's like all of this stuff so cis normative that like there's constantly ways in which like you're questioning like whether it's safe or whether people will like you or respect you or not like ostracize you. And so that's a really like challenging thing. I often talk about living with chronic disease. I live with chronic disease. I talk about like you have a backpack on top of your like or a full-time job, sorry, on top of your normal life. And I feel like queerness is like similar in that like it people talk about like, why do you have to like talk about your queerness all the time? So because it impacts almost every aspect of my life, like you think I could just go to work, but it's like, people talk about their families and whatever. And so I want to talk about my own experience. So I think that if this podcast has helped anybody, like try to like, you feel more valid in your identity, or you see yourself in any of the people, whether it's the 4 survivors that we got to chat with, or Evvie or Matt or myself, that's awesome. That's the point of this podcast, to celebrate those folks and to celebrate you. And so I just really appreciate this message I got, because I think it's like really it's like, that's what we're trying to do, I think, on this podcast.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah, Grace. And that's why, like, having this during Pride Month is just so perfect, because like it is, you know, there can be so much like hard stuff and about being queer, and like this time in the world, it's like feels like extra scary, and yet like it is so freaking joyous to be yourself. Like I really like, ultimately, like no matter anything else that comes from it, the deep sense of like I am living as myself is a feeling that can only, I honestly feel like you can only really feel it if you've experienced not living that way and then coming into it. Like I often describe it as a feeling of like gears that were like a little off, and then I realized I was queer, and it's just like and everything like is now like in place, and is like
that's why when you come out, make sure you go to the mechanic. Like it's very important. Get your oil changed.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing. We're gonna cut to the interview with Todd soon. But one thing I want to make sure you get your Pride is Spoken t-shirts. If you're watching the podcast, I'm wearing mine. You can get them in many different colors. And once again, we asked Rob, when we sell the t-shirts, can the profits all go to a charity that supports LGBTQ people? And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of piggyback on this podcast, Crooked Media. They have their a fundraiser happening right now called it's Fuck Bans Leave Queer Kids Alone. And if you donate to it, then it splits it between 4 different charities, which is Promo, which is Visions of Missouri, where everyone has full equality in their hearts and minds of all people in areas of law, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. The Tennessee Equality Project, which funds the advancement of policies through direct and grassroots lobbying, which protects the rights of LGBTQ people and their families at home in Tennessee. The Fairness Campaign, which we actually supported months ago when we had our podcast about some of the stuff that was happening with Nick Wilson. It engages in legislative advocacy efforts to advance LGBTQ civil rights across Kentucky. And then Equality Florida Action, which is the largest organization in Florida devoted to electing pro-equality candidates to all levels of government through mobilization, advocacy, and education. They engage and turn out pro-equality voters in Florida to support LGBTQ right candidates. So if we all the proceeds from all the t-shirts that we sold this month will go to the Fuck Bans Leave Queer Kids Alone. I think in brackets they also have and adults and all of us, you absolute freaks. Is what
yeah. Love that.
To get your t-shirt.
Yeah,
and send us a photo.
Yeah, please. And also like wear it when it's not Pride Month too. And you know, just know like we'll be wearing our shirts all year round. Literally. Not
my neighbor saw me wearing my shirt and she said that shirt goes hard.
That's
it
right.
Really does. Yeah. Thank you, Tricky Rice, for the graphic design, and just love it so much.
All right, we're gonna cut to the interview with Todd, and then we'll be back after the interview to say goodbye.
All right, everybody, it's Matt Scott here, and it is my distinct honor and privilege, alongside Grace, to welcome the one, the only. There's so many words to describe this man, but some might say that he's iconic, legendary, game-changing. Some today might also say he's funky in a good way, or poppy, maybe, because he's the one, the only, Todd Herzog. Todd, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for being here and just for being part of this conversation. The Pride has spoken this month. We've been able to talk with Carla. We've been able to talk with We've been able to talk with Missy, all from much more recent seasons of Survivor, where things definitely have been a lot different when it comes to queer representation, and their stories are a lot different. We love the diversity of the stories that we're able to bring, and I think that it's like interesting that we're kind of like going back in time a little bit to someone who maybe this is like the one of the few pieces of Survivor we'll talk about within this, to say like someone from possibly my favorite season of Survivor and possibly my favorite winner. There we go. But you know, like, we're thrilled to have you, Todd. And one of the things that Grace and I love to start out with is just recognizing how much people might have their own idea of who you are. We'd love to know, in your words, who are you?
Who am I? Okay, it's such a huge question, because like the short answer is like I am just fully 100% myself. In my youth, I spent so much time trying to fit into specific categories because I was trying to discover who I was. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until, when I started to become an adult where I was like, wait a second, I don't have to fit into any kind of specific box because I am just me. And I like that. So I am a kind person. I am a talkative person. I am someone who loves other people. I just like people. I seek adventure. I love trying new things, and I speak my mind. I am just completely myself. And I think that's just the best way I can say as to how I identify. I'm just Todd, and Todd is perfectly fine with me.
I love that a lot. We talk on the in the intro we did for this podcast, somebody messaged me, and it was just about someone being like, it feels like this podcast is just validating my identity to just be me. It's like, that's awesome. That's what we want. And so I love, we talk a lot about how we started with Carla, who was full of confidence. And I talked about projecting on a little bit of my like queer insecurity onto Carla. Carla was like, no, I'm just a badass queer woman. And, but I love sort of this idea of like, your identity is just you. It's just who you are. I love it.
Just me, because you know what, I feel like, and I'm sure that many people out there can relate, I spent so much time trying to decide where my puzzle piece fit, and it wasn't until I finally realized, like, I don't have to fit in anywhere. I am perfectly fine with exactly who I am.
I think we've talked about this before a lot, that where like labels for me were really important when I was like trying to figure out who I was and coming out. And it was so that when I found the one that felt like it was like perfect, and I put it on myself, like, that's the label, that's me. And it was really empowering. And the longer I feel like I've been out, the less I feel like I need that label. And almost, I actually feel like I want to rip the label off, and mostly just to confuse straight people. It's just to be like, my identity is me. So you have to figure out how to navigate. I've been trying to navigate your world forever. Now you navigate mine. I'm just Grace.
Yeah, I think it's like interesting too, Grace, like in mentioning that, because you're making me think about like even when like Todd, when you were on Survivor China and part of that game, like it was, Grace and I have talked about this a lot, actually, in another podcast we have, Heartstopper, where we're like watching the show on Netflix and like taking it all in and watching like two queer kids in high school. And like the world was a lot different in many ways, but also a lot different to queer people, to gay people, people on, in the LGBTQ plus community. And I am like so curious from your perspective, like what that was even like, just kind of what your life was like a little bit prior to that experience when it comes to your queerness. Because like one thing that's awesome about this conversation is that, like you said, you are just yourself. But like we're just here especially to celebrate like the gay part of yourself. No offense.
No, so like that's actually a really fantastic question, because like 16 years ago is when my season of Survivor was. 16 years is a long time. And it was so different than life is today with young people who are just barely discovering who they are, who they love, what they need and whatnot. So for me, I mean, I grew up Mormon in Utah, and it was extremely religious and extremely it's a bubble. But it was also like very, very just very white, very straight, very, this is how it is. And I always knew that I was not okay with just how comfortable the bubble was for some people. But I also felt like, I had said with the puzzle piece, like my puzzle piece did not fit into that. And I was so confused. There wasn't a whole lot of gay representation anywhere. I remember when Ellen came out on her sitcom, and it was like, like what? Like, no way. And because it was just shocking. And then when I started watching Survivor, you know, of course, it was a huge deal that Richard Hatch won the first season because, I mean, he's an openly gay man. And it was just like so unheard of. But I didn't find myself like super able to relate to him. I was like, okay, but I'm not like him. What am I, you know? So anyway, like as seasons went on, they were very stereotyped casting. You know, it was like, we're going to cast the young Southern girl, we're going to cast the old guy, we're going to cast the 2 Black people, we're going to cast the 1 gay person. I mean, that's just how it was. And I never once found someone that I could personally relate to. I found many people that I loved and liked because that's just who I am. I like people. So when I finally did come out of the closet, I was very, very scared at first. I was 18 years old, and I didn't really tell a whole lot of people. I just told, you know, some close people to me. So, you know, fast forward a few years later to when I actually made it on Survivor, I was like, okay, well, this is the moment where everybody's going to know. And I was like, am I okay with that? And I didn't even really skip a beat because I was like, I am okay with that because I like who I am. And I'm not going to try to be anybody else to make people happy. And then when I went out there, my whole idea was maybe I can be that gay man who others can relate to. So people like me who couldn't find exactly what person to relate to on the show, maybe there were others like me. And so I was just myself. And that was the coolest part about it, was hearing a lot of gay people or, you know, young LGBTQ plus people say to me, like, you didn't make me feel like I was doing something wrong. You were just doing what you wanted. And that means a lot to me because there isn't a script on how you're supposed to be if you're gay, straight, bi. Well, you know, there isn't a specific way. And so
you didn't get the manual? We're supposed to send you the manual.
Right next to the phone book. Oh gosh, next time.
Yeah, like it was scary.
Yeah.
And not everybody liked the idea that I was a 22-year-old gay man that won Survivor, but guess what? I didn't care. Like, this is fine with me. You don't have to like it. So
it is the sort of coming out process, like you talked about, like you told a few people, right? And I think I've talked a lot on these podcasts. I'm sure people are sick of it, of that, like queer people don't come out just once.
Right.
You come out potentially all the time. Even you know, now, like you try, you know, if you go somewhere and you don't know the people, and it's like, how much of my identity am I going to let you sort of in on, versus how much I just want to you know. So I feel like, yeah, that's a really interesting notion. And I think that there is this sort of journey, but that you go on between, there's a little piece that, like, at some point you're just not sure whether it's like safe or not to come out. So you know, you tell somebody or wherever you sort of come out. And then you sort of still live in a little bit of a bubble where, like, some people know and some people don't know. And it really does take, like, I know in my family personally, like, coming out was a thing that I had to be okay, like, not just for how it would, like, impact whether people would want to have a relationship with me in terms of, like, being my Facebook friend or what, and you know, you have but you have to get over that idea that, like, they might want to block, they want to delete your and never associate you with you ever again, and you have to be completely okay with that, just knowing how the world is. And I think the thing that I have found that, for, you know, I don't know whether this is fully related, but, like, you find out that most people, it doesn't, like, it doesn't change their perspective of you that much. And when the people who do see that, like, oh wow, that's a really important part of you that I see, and now I see you as your truer self, and you get to be who you are, like, those are really, like, sometimes it enhances those relationships.
Yes, absolutely. Because, like, one thing, and I remember having the conversation, you know, with my dad, and I was like, I said, I'm no longer lying to myself.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm not only not lying to you, I'm not lying to my friends, I'm not lying to my entire family, but I'm not lying to myself. And he was like, okay, that's great. And I was like, thanks, you know, like, that's because that's how it felt. Is like, I was keeping this thing inside of me that was really, you know, it was just horrible because I couldn't say, oh, I think he's cute, or oh, I have this thought about this person. Like I couldn't say that to anybody ever. And that was so hard because it was more confusing up in my own brain, because I was like, am I actually like this, or is this just something that happens, you know, to people? Like, do they have these thoughts? And with religion and whatnot, teaching me like you must marry a woman and you must have these kids and you must. So I really thought that I was doing something wrong. But it wasn't until I finally was like, wait, are you joking me right now? Like, I wouldn't purposely choose to have a harder life in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
So, but the funny thing is, as I say, I wouldn't purposely choose to have a harder life, but I don't think that my life is harder. I think my life is very fulfilled. And, you know, some people may look at it as, oh, I've gone through these struggles and stuff. And it's like, yeah, I've gone through many struggles outside of being gay, but I'm still here and I'm still a person. And my biggest thing that I tell anybody and everybody is like, I don't care who you are. If you are a good person and you are good to me, I will be good to you and I will love you.
That's I'm gonna cry. That's beautiful. And I think it's like interesting. One of the things that just like jumps out to me, and you know, we're just even getting into family, is like so often the stories, or at least traditionally, I feel like the stories that we've heard have been like the horror stories of what happens. And that is like a reality for a lot of people in a lot of different places. But I think, Todd, like one thing that really jumps out to me with your story, and I'm even just thinking back to the phenomenal Talking with T-Bird interview you did with the one and only T-Bird Cooper, shout out to a legend, is that like she, you know, you're talking about family there, and just like the closeness of, you know, you with your siblings and with family. And I think that like, you know, sometimes we just need to be reminded that like that totally could be our reality. And like Grace was saying, like so often in terms of like people I talk with too, it's like, and just my own experience, it's like positive, and people like love you and want to support you and just want you to be like freaking honest about like who you are. Which actually, oddly, I wasn't planning on this, but takes me to a question that Grace often asks. And Grace, I feel like I have to always hand it back to you as like the innovator of this question.
Well, I feel like when you were talking about the fact that you were lying to people, and I do want to edit with, you know, it's because society sucks that queer people have to lie about their identity for their own personal safety and to feel good. But then I wonder, then you go play a game that's all about lying. And I'm like, are queer people just going to naturally, like, are we better at the game because we are in these situations all the time, or like, or at least were for a period of our life? Like by the time someone goes to play Survivor, you might be out and living your authentic self and not really doing that. But does that experience of that time when we were sort of like, you know, you enter a room and have to figure out like, okay, how much of my identity, as I was saying before, can someone know about me? I don't know if you feel like it translates at all, or am I just projecting?
Okay, well, this is what I think is like, we don't have the proof because there's what, 3 of us who have actually won.
3 winners, yeah.
I mean,
so like that doesn't make sense. However, I do feel like from a strategy point of view, it 1000% can be beneficial. However, at the same time, I know a lot of queer people who are horrible liars.
Thank you.
Who are, you know, they want to be something where they want to be like some sort of strategic mastermind or whatever, but they're just not good at it. And so I don't think that it's necessarily because, you know, I'm sure you have met some people as well who, you know, they were in the closet about their sexuality and everybody knew except for them, kind of thing.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, like, it's okay to be honest, I guess. I don't know. Like, I don't want to sound rude about it anyway, but like sometimes it's just a skill that you gain from work, maybe. Like, I was a flight attendant. I worked at Disney World. Like, I worked with people who are awful. And so I learned how to deal with them. Like, maybe that's why.
Yeah. Well,
Matt, sorry, Evvie actually did request that we maybe ask you about this. It was really interesting, which is I wondered too. I think that so I was rewatching some of, and Evvie, I think their partner was watching Survivor China, rewatching or watching for the first time, and there's this moment at the beginning where you tell them that you tell the tribe you're a flight attendant, and Jean Robert like doesn't believe you. He's like, I don't think that's true. I think Evvie was like wondering, like, is there more to that in terms of like what he was thinking about? Was that like in terms of, I don't know how much like queerness there is coded into like Jean Robert's question, or is that just like he's like, you seem way smarter and sneakier, and I don't think you're a flight attendant. I think you do something else. You know,
there's actually like a full story behind.
Yes.
Okay. So we as castmates, we got to Los Angeles before we flew to China, and we were on lockdown in our hotel rooms. There was nothing on TV, so I turned on the World Poker Tournament, and Jean Robert was on it. Right? This is before I had seen Jean Robert.
Right.
Yeah.
Like days before, which is so weird because it was right. Anyway, we get to China, and I'm like, that's freaking Jean Robert. Like, I knew who it was. Well, we get on those stairs in the very first episode, hiking up to the temple, and we're all introducing ourselves. And I said, I saw you on the World Poker Tournament. And he instantly got defensive, like, no. And it's because I just blew his cover. Right. He wasn't going to tell anybody that he was a poker player.
Right.
So when I said flight attendant, I think it was like almost his way of trying to call me out on something.
Right.
Like his
even the playing field. Yeah.
And I think he thought like, if I go with that, he's going to get defensive. But I was like, why would I lie about it? You know, like, why would I lie about it like that? Like,
also, when we flew over, I was your flight attendant.
Like it was just such a weird thing. So, I mean, I think he was just upset that I got a one-up on him completely. But Jean Robert was, I think he was just really, he'd never had gay friends. He'd never hung out with gay people ever. And so he didn't believe that it was he thought it was a choice, that I was just choosing all of this. And it wasn't until literally after the game of Survivor, and I'm not kidding, this is super crazy. I went down to Las Vegas and he was there, of course, and he brought me and the guy I was with at the time to a strip club. He bought identical twin lap dances.
Oh no!
To try to turn us straight. And it wasn't until he saw me pay these women to get off of me that he was like, wow, I believe you now.
Oh my gosh.
Cheers to that.
I didn't know Jean Robert turned you straight. That's news to me. I didn't know that happened. Wow.
Something.
That's a wild story.
I love the idea of the identical twins, really. Like, identical twins. That's how we'll get
one
them.
On me and one on the guy that I was with.
Yeah, you were with somebody.
I was like, Jean Robert, like, this is a stupid thing. But then again, I have to sit back and think to myself, like, why did I agree to go to a strip club with him in the first place? I don't know.
It's a great story for a future podcast.
What? Yeah, like, why not? Yeah, sure. Like, they have good chicken wings in strip clubs.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that is amazing. Wow.
Yeah, and I think like
we're all speechless.
I've got a lot of really crazy stories, guys, because you got to remember, like, that I was a very different generation. So like,
yeah,
a lot of, even now, if you watch back, like Courtney and the way that they talk to her and stuff like that, like, that is not okay.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Well, it's that I was thinking today there that we're like, it feels like it's, 16 years ago, which, like, yes, is a long period of time, but also not a long period of time,
right?
In terms of when the show aired. And so, but like since then, like, obviously, like in the United States, gay marriage is like, so it's not legal at the time of Survivor China, right? All this stuff. But now we're like, it's almost like, this is like, I firmly believe that America will come through all of the stuff that is happening. But like today, there's a Supreme Court. The day we're recording, on the last day of Pride Month, there's a ruling about the Supreme Court that you can discriminate against LGBTQ Americans. This website said she's never had no gay couples ever come to her, like, build me a website, and yet somehow she got to the Supreme Court saying that she can discriminate against them. And it's just wild to me that there's such this backlash, because it's so weird for me to think, like, at that time it's sort of like pre a lot of the progress we've made, and it feels like right now it's trying to be like crawled back again, like so soon.
Yeah, it's literally trying to go backwards, and I don't understand why. Like, what is the fear, you know, like that will take over? Because like, I don't understand. Like, we're
not going to get our shit together for that.
I know, right? Like, come on. But,
I mean, we could try, but we'd have to.
I don't see
over sleeves
anybody in the queer community out there, you know, trying to interfere or change anything with any straight life.
No.
So why do they care?
Say it a million times. I say that everybody's sick of this quote, but we're not trying to make straight kids gay or cis kids trans. We just want them to grow up and be gay and trans adults. That's all we want. You know, we want them to grow up and be able to be themselves. So.
Yeah. And I think like part of it too is just like it's I mean, you bring up like a great topic, Grace, because something that it makes me think about is actually I want to say it was like 2 years ago, Grace, we were watching this series on Hulu, the Pride series, which kind of goes like decade by decade through gay life in the US. And one thing I found so interesting is like they're kind of setting it up like the 50s, 60s. Things were a little bit easier when people just kind of like were gay, and it didn't have as much of a spotlight on it. And then, you know, fast forward to the 80s, and then there's really gay people under attack. And, you know, something that makes me think about with your experience, Todd, is that, and, you know, maybe this is oversimplifying like where we were culturally at that time, but like gay people were so much still like the butt of the joke in different forms of media and not taken seriously. And then obviously that changed over the years and a lot of progress happened. And now we're kind of where we are. But I am curious from your perspective, like if you because you're someone who people knew, like, oh, this is like, you know, you're actually, I'm sure for a lot of people, you might have been like the only gay person that they knew of in media or anywhere, which is like really sad and horrible. But I guess like the question for me is like, did you experience people not taking you seriously, or like, what was your experience in relation to this? Because I'm you know, I'm sure there were lots of people who were horrible as well, but just want to kind of give you space to reflect on that or share that.
It's kind of strange because like, I feel like most people, if they did have any kind of problem or issue or whatever with it, were like scared to talk to me. And so I would almost like go out of my way to make them feel comfortable. Yeah. And I will still do that to this day because it's sad, but it still does happen in my home of Utah from time to time, not all the time, but like where people will be like, oh yeah, and you've got a partner now? And I'm like, oh, my husband? Yeah. That I'm married? Yeah, I do. You know, like, oh, just knock my whole desk over. But so my goal in any kind of those situations is just to make a person feel like they're comfortable, because that's how I want to be. I want to be treated respectfully, just like anybody else, you know, like if I go into a room, I am there for a reason, and it's usually because I want to be there. So make me feel welcome. And I feel like every single human being on this planet deserves that. I don't care about, you know, what you identify as or who you are, you know, like if you're, like I said, if you're a good person, you're a good person, and that's all that matters. So just be good to people. So, but the butt of all jokes things, like that was a big deal. Everything was, oh, that's so gay, or you know, everything. And that bugged me. And so I remember I was probably like 23. So it was after Survivor, and my little brother said, oh, that's gay. And I was like, and what's wrong with being gay, Ty? And he was like, nothing is wrong, nothing. And I'm like, okay, then why do you say that?
Mm-hmm.
And he stopped using it. So like he actually like learned a lesson from it. And you know, I just wanted to be like, it's one of those simple things that if you just think about it, you're literally saying that really ridiculous, stupid thing is bad by using the word gay.
Mm-hmm.
So you're calling gay bad. So just little things like that. And I'm not perfect, you know, I will still say things that I don't necessarily mean to say. And I am so open to people correcting me because that's the only way that I will learn.
It's I do feel like that I have not heard, and maybe, you know, obviously like I might be in a bubble in terms of like the people who are using it in that way, but I think Hillary Duff really fixed it. We don't say that's gay anymore.
I was gonna say she comes to mind. Why did you say that? Don't say that.
She solved it.
You know what you're saying?
That's great.
Yeah, no, it was, and the thing is like, and that resonates with me so much, Todd, though, because like and it's so funny, like perspective is everything, because like, you know, we're not that, and like I'm 31 now. Like we're not that far off in age and generations and everything else, which I think is really awesome. And one, you know, I just remember going to like an all boys school at that time, and that was literally the thing. And it's just kind of something where, I mean, like one, like figuring out my sexuality for sure. I wasn't the most offended by that, especially as someone who I just call myself queer now, but definitely is more of like a bisexual, or like someone who didn't know, like, am I still straight? I don't know. So like, but that was really hurtful at the time. And you know what? They should have had you in the PSAs instead of Hillary Duff. That's all I'm saying. And it's not too late. Like there's AI, Photoshop. Let's just switch that up.
Just check. Done.
Yeah, exactly.
Todd, I know you worked in a movie theater. You're a big movie buff.
Yes, I'm a huge buff.
Yes, I do poster recaps theater on poster recaps. A big movie buff as well. Are they like LGBTQ movies? The particular like what are your favorites?
Oh my gosh. Okay,
I know favorite is tough. Just whatever you think of. Yeah, Annie.
Well,
all right. There's no good gay movies. You heard it here first.
No, like
no.
So okay, like I'm thinking of like Heartstopper. Like you had mentioned Heartstopper.
Yeah.
I actually loved Heartstopper. I cannot wait for season.
Comes back in August. Yeah. That one to me is like just imagining that there would have been a show that was like about coming, because like I knew I was gay. I didn't know I was trans. I really didn't have the language for trans, and trans stuff didn't really like come into this, I guess, really until like, you know, Laverne Cox was in like obviously it existed, but I feel like for like me to be able to see it and understand and have language for it. But yeah, I remember in high school I would jokingly come out to my best friend, just my friend Kat. I would jokingly, and then I'd be like, no, I'm just kidding, I'm not gay. And then like even when I did then come out years later, I mentioned this on our previous podcast, she did like bawl her eyes out and cry because I think she was like, maybe there's a chance that we would have, you know, whatever. But yeah, I would jokingly come out in high school. But Heartstopper for me was just like, imagine having this piece of like such affirming love, and there's so little, like, you know, there is homophobia, but it's so much more about like them being, you know, it's great, it's so good.
Because like the hard thing is like, yes, there is a lot of wonderful LGBTQ plus, you know, cinema now, more so than there used to be. But like I look back growing up, and when I was in the movie theater, like I honestly do not remember any movies coming. Brokeback Mountain was the first one to come to a theater, and it's like shocking. And there were theaters around Utah that were not playing it; they were banning. And I mean, of course, I went and saw it, but I was like, you know, it was such a sad movie. It was like all about hiding yourself and your identity. So like when Love, Simon came out, me and
Love Simon,
my siblings and my mom, like my parents, we all went together to watch it. And it was crazy because it was like, look at this. This is very similar to like how I felt, where I was like scared and, you know, and so I feel like movies like that and shows like that are, you know, really great for anybody to watch. Because
Love, Simon is great. It's so good. People should watch it. Yeah, put it on your watch list. Yeah.
But it's like funny, this whole thing of like, no, it's just like, I mean, it's just interesting thinking of like, I mean, and Grace and I talk about this a lot, representation really does matter, but it's tough when, especially then, like, I think that your answer to the question about movies makes perfect sense, just because, like, that's why we're here. And like, one of the things that Grace and I and Evvie have even talked about with this podcast is like, how has there not been like this specific type of podcast, like just talking about queer experiences in Survivor, which is like such a queer coded show / like increasingly queer, which is like awesome. But it took a while for us to get here.
It's really honestly kind of crazy because Survivor has like an extremely large queer fan base.
Yeah.
And it always has.
Yes.
And that, like, and I wish I could give the exact answer as to why, but like, I guess it doesn't have to have an answer as to why. We just, I know, it just does. I mean, and that maybe it's because I identified with the source of adventure, like I was telling you earlier, you know, about like the fitting in thing. And what I mean by fitting in is like, I felt like I had to either like musicals or I had to like be a specific way when I was younger if I was gay, because that's what I was basically told gay people like, but I didn't. And so when I found Survivor, it was like my source of adventure and gameplay and strategy and stuff like that. And I was like, that's where I fit in. And I don't know, maybe that's why a lot of queer people like it, because they don't really have another place.
Well, I think that could be true. Certainly that the show, even if it was very narrow in its scope of the type of queer people it would put on the show, which I wanted to bring this up earlier, is I think that predominantly it was gay men. You get Vanuatu and you get like two, queer women, which is amazing. Yes. But it's so interesting because I think our perception of the type of queer people who've been on the show is that it's, white gay men and they fit in there. And I thought it was so interesting when you said like there wasn't anybody on the show who you could have related to before. Like it wasn't Richard Hatch. And I think that there's this idea, there's two things to that, which is one that's just true, that like there's a much more broad version of like what a gay man, like even a white gay man looks like. But also I think because I'm challenging my notion of like, who I look to as like these people who I'm most related to, and they often did fit into that stereotype, but it's because that's all I had, in terms of talking about the media that we used to have. Like, I mean, it was literally the law that if you had gay people in the movie, it had to end in tragedy. It could not end.
Yes.
It could not be a happy ending.
Couldn't be happy.
Yeah, it could not be happy. And so the type of media that we used to get, like, and the type of like queer men we got often were, or like queer people, that's all we had. So then that's all we were able. And I often think this is really interesting when I did a podcast called Hold Up, where we look at LGBTQ community. So we watch the Ellen Show and see if it holds up, and we watch Friends and all of this stuff. And one of the things I wanted to talk about at some point was like queer icons who aren't queer, because queer people are looking like grasping for like representation and identity. And so you have like Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, like being a queer icon, but she's a straight woman, it's like, how does that happen? It's because there's so little. And I think, we've come a long way. Obviously we still have a long way to go, but like a third of the past season of Survivor being queer, and you get 6 different LGBTQ people, like that is amazing.
So awesome.
Yes.
I was like, this is crazy, because it's not a stereotype. It is a broad mix, and I loved it. It was so cool. And that's one of the reasons why Amy Cusack does stand out to me, because she's so fluid and fabulous and wonderful. And she was one of the people who I did relate to most. Yeah. Even though she was a female. But I was like, she's just so genuinely herself. And I still to this day love that woman.
Did an interview with Evvie last year, and it's so great. Can I ask, this is, I think, a thing that people were bringing up when Jam Jam won, the first gay winner since you won. And I'm interested because I think on one hand, like, great, amazing, celebrate it. And also at the same time, like, that's a really long time to go in between. So I'm wondering how you feel just about that, that's what happened, and that we have our first gay winner since China.
I think it's freaking awesome. Are you kidding me? Jam Jam went out there with a mission. Yeah. And he went out there with a goal, and he flat out said, like, right at the beginning, he's like, I'm here to play Survivor. I was meant to do this. And I was like, get it. Like, you are, So first of all, I think it's amazing that he won. he deserved it. He played a very awesome game. It kind of comes down to, you know, a lot of people say, like, what is the formula to winning Survivor? And I really truly don't think that there is a perfect formula. I feel like when you're out there, it's a different story than watching, because you are surrounded with, you're out there with these people 24/7. So you get to know them on a different level. The number one thing is your social game.
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to get to know these people on a deeper level than just face value? If so, that's probably going to benefit you, especially if you actually care about these people. Because if you don't care about these people, it's really hard to pretend that you do. You know, like, and it doesn't, I mean, unless you're really just blind to it, most people can tell when someone doesn't like you. And so I'm super glad that a gay man has finally won. But it's funny because I was like, holy shit, it has actually been 16 years since that's happened.
Yeah.
You know? And I don't know. So, like, I'm not mad that another gay guy or girl or, you know, whatever. I'm not mad that they haven't won since then. Because I feel like if you win this show, you obviously did something right. But I'm super happy that he finally did. And he's not only is he gay, he's the first Puerto Rican male to win. Like, that's huge. Like, just diversity. It's exciting to see.
Yeah. And I think it's awesome too. Like, there's so much, I think, even just looking at this last season, but also this new era of Survivor, that is sort of a reflection, not only of just like you as part of Survivor, but then how you described yourself today, which is like someone who's not just like the gay one, or like the, you know, whatever it might be. It's nuanced people who we're getting. And one of the things that Grace and I have talked about a bit is, like, even just in this last season, as an example, you know, you have a third of the cast who is queer, but that's not everyone's story on the show, which you know, is a fascinating thing. I think that, you know, it's complicated because, you know, as I've talked about, for instance, even as like a, you know, young Black person, if I were on the show, I wouldn't have to have that be a young Black queer person. I wouldn't want to have that be my story. And yet at the same time, I think, you know, it kind of comes down to the individual of like, how much do you want to represent this? And maybe like one thing I'm kind of wondering from you is, like, did you feel that you were able to show up and like represent the things that you wanted to, or you in your best form? Like, did that translate? And I'm kind of curious, just actually, you know, well, beyond that, like, curious of, you know, if you have any advice for future players on like being represented properly, or, you know, in their fullest selves.
It's interesting that you say that, because like, I remember after my season was done, I was doing something with GLAAD at this film festival, and they were announcing like the GLAAD nominees. I was announcing the GLAAD nominees of the year. That's what my job was up there. So, and I was super excited to be a part of it, blah, blah, blah. But then after I had announced them all, one of the head guys of GLAAD came up and was like, the only reason why you weren't nominated is because you didn't talk about being gay enough.
What?
And I was like, what? I was like, wait, what do you mean? Like, I don't have to, I don't feel like I have to sit around and talk about like being gay to represent me as a human being.
That's also not fair, because Survivor cut the confessional where you went gay, 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 gay. And that would have been enough, I think.
But I just thought it was like so strange, because that was his point of view, whereas what I at is, it's like I went out there and I represented exactly who I am, and part of me is a very proud gay man.
Right. Part of you.
So, yeah, a part of me. It is not my identity. It is a part of who I am.
That's wild. You were not nominated.
I know, right?
Yeah, and I think it's like, but what's interesting, what I kind of take, one thing I take away from that, one, you should have been nominated, haters, but the other piece of that is like, I guess it does really come down to that person, like how do they want their story to be told? Are they happy with how it's being represented? And at the end of the day, like, and Survivor producers, I'm thinking of Jeff Probst's podcast where he talks about it, you know, everything is, they have, I don't know how many tens of thousands of hours of footage that they mentioned having, but like cut down to that 42 minutes, or, you know, with plus commercials each week, which will be thankfully a little bit more come this fall. But, you know, like it's not, you know, the story is not in your hands. And so, I mean, hopefully folks are happy with how it's been represented.
I feel like I was represented perfectly.
Yeah.
Like I watched it and I was like, that's me. That's what I talk like. That's what I think like. That is me. And so I was represented exactly as who I am. You know, a little sneaky, a little bit witty, a little bit dry, a little bit sassy, but like that's just me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I think it's so interesting because when we were talking about that, some of the folks who are from the 44 cast, like that was not, their story was not told in terms of even being mentioned, really. And it is this balance between wanting to feel like, you know, and I think as queer people, like I think about how much it, like being queer does impact my life, but also, yeah, it's not all of me. There's also all of these other things that are part of me, like being a Survivor reality show fan, Survivor fan. I'm a pro wrestling fan, Matt, right? Like there's all of these other things that are about me, and yet being queer does relate to, you know, almost all of them, if you know. And so it is this balance, I think might just be hard and nearly impossible for like straight people to understand how that works. Although we're talking about from GLAAD being like, it's I think that GLAAD should get that. But yeah, like I struggle to think that like Survivor could ever really like perfectly match the balance unless they have queer people behind the scenes helping to tell those stories.
Yeah, absolutely right. So like, here's another thing too, is part of me does wonder if maybe, and this is just my opinion, I don't know, maybe they're not mentioning it because it's trying to be normalized.
Right.
You know, like I appreciate personally when I watch a show and I see a trans or gay or lesbian person on the show, but it's like never really talked about. They're just like they're a friend, or they're this sibling, or this and that, and it's like it's a very normal thing in life on the show. And I'm like, because that's how life is. To me, it's normal to go hang out with my friends, and some of them are queer and some are not. I don't know. I don't know if I'm getting that across exactly how I wanted to, but like, I guess the thing I can put it to the most is this movie I saw. It was a terrible movie, so I wouldn't recommend it. But it was called like Bones, I think. And it was about like digging up dinosaur bones in South Dakota. But there was a trans actor, and they never mentioned the fact that she was trans. And I was like, this is great. She's just a freaking paleontologist out there digging up dinosaur bones. And not once are they just being like, oh yeah, let's go on your backstory, because she was just her digging up bones. And I thought that was crazy cool.
Yeah, I think I'm mostly there with you. I think that it's almost impossible for me to imagine like a scenario where, like, you know, especially in something that's like going to be a movie or a TV show, and it's so about your life, that like some character, there wouldn't be some mention of that with, but I get to your point. It does not need to be, the story doesn't need to be about a person being gay, about a person being trans, right? That doesn't need to be the impetus for the story. And it doesn't need to be, you know, we're talking about all this queer media that's like, doesn't have to be sad and tragic, or like even a coming out story. Like it's so refreshing when like you meet a character and they are like, they're gay. They're already out, you know?
Curious, Grace, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So, if you were writing a movie, with a trans actress, like what do you want to see?
So so it's really, so a good example of this as well is if anybody's a Yellow Jackets fan, and we actually interviewed Nicole Maines, who's on the show, who's a trans actress, and Nicole, we interviewed Nicole, and I asked, like, it doesn't seem like this is part of your story, and she said, well, then I think my character is cis. And that was really interesting to me, because I feel like it so comes up, and the way that I would just in my life, like if I I might throw in a joke about me being trans, or like something, that's like, it doesn't need to be tragedy, and it doesn't need to be all encompassing, but when you're like, you were talking before about like, if when you're queer and you see somebody like, so you might see a guy and be like, like it doesn't need to be like the story, but I feel like it's so, I think it's disingenuous to think, and sometimes what I feel like TV shows or movies are trying to do is kind of have their cake and eat it too, in terms of when you have a trans or queer person on your show and you never really acknowledge that they're ever queer or trans, then it feels, but there's like the implication or whatever, it feels like you're trying to like sneak that person in there so that some people will be like, oh, there it is, and then but also the like homophobes won't be like, this movie is too woke,
Right. I like that you said that, because I appreciate that more than the idea of normalizing it. So I like that, and I will change my thought process because of that. I like that.
And I think like a big piece of it too is that so often it's like, what do we want in this like one piece of media? Or because like traditionally it has been that we've had such limited options, and something that I'm just thinking back, Grace, to our Heartstopper conversations too, where it's like, it would be amazing to have all of it, like the range of representation, the range of character types, the range of options. And so that's like the tricky thing about it. Like we're still working to get there, a lot better than it's been in the past, right? So you have to kind of celebrate progress there. But
I think I could get to where you are too, Todd, like in terms of like, that person just in there and it's not meant, but like we're in an era where like, like we're being legislated out of existence, so it's like,
outrageous. It's so infuriating. All of Florida right now pisses me off, because I lived in Florida for 10 years and I just even stand what's happening anyway. So yes.
One question we like to ask in here, we enlighten the mood, which is, what have you been doing for Pride? How are you celebrating Pride?
I mean, other than typical, woo, I'm at the festival. Like
anything,
What was that, Todd? We didn't get that the first time.
That's
okay,
I'm
getting it. Sure. No, so like it's funny because like I tell people who are like, what are you doing for Pride? I'm like, Pride is every day. Like I know, but that's such a like also like an underdog answer where it's like, oh, want. But like other than that, I have not done anything very specific to celebrate Pride, which I don't want. And I'm like, Todd, am I doing anything? Am I doing something wrong? Am I being a bad gay man? Like, what am I doing?
No, I think that's okay. I think it's okay to like, that's not doesn't have to be like the big Pride Day doesn't have to be the way in which everybody engages. In Pride,
and you know what? Like, you don't have to do it every single year. It's your literally just by like living, kind of like you're saying, like that's like, I mean, it doesn't need to be Pride, but like that's how you're choosing to do it.
A huge part of it though too is like, so I'm in recovery, like so back in the day, I would just go hard.
Yeah.
So a lot of my memories of Pride are just like me being a drunken crazy mess. And it's not like I'm avoiding that, because like that's not the reason, but that's my specific relation to Pride. So it's not the same anymore.
Yeah.
Sense. It's still fun and it's still super exciting, and I love seeing the supporting people. I love seeing the people coming out to support, especially here in Utah, because that's just, it's nice to know that they're here. But like, I went to box lunch the other day. I don't know if you know what box lunch is, but they, they're like, do you want to round up your 43 cents change to go to the LGBT? And I was like, to me? And she was like, to you? And I said, I'm the LGBT. She was like, oh, and she like panicked. And I'm like, no, you're fine. It's fine. But I'm like, it's just simple things like that where I'm like, just every day, like, I'm just happy to be me. I don't know.
Yeah. By the way, just as a side note, Todd, you're reminding me of like when walking down the street in DC, and it's like the folks are like, "Do you have time for gay rights?" And I'm like, "I do," which is why I have to go. So,
you mean me?
you know, yeah, exactly. So, but it's interesting. You brought up something that that I think really resonates and is an important conversation too. Like, I have a friend who is a gay man who is in recovery more recently, and like I think that sometimes I not even think what I've seen though sometimes is like, how do I navigate this space? Like, I mean, I'll speak for Washington DC as an example of like lots of just drinking, and that feels like it's so intertwined with the gay experience. But I mean, I don't know if I really have a question. I'm just like kind of curious from your perspective, like about like any advice you have for folks who are navigating that, because obviously it's not the easiest thing during Pride Month, especially for folks who are more newly sober. And I know that a lot of people have, seen and been inspired by your example too.
It's really tricky. It's such a hard thing to get, because like I didn't want to get sober for the longest time. You know, I didn't want to. I fought it every step of the way because I believed that me being like the crazy fun party drinking person was a huge part of my identity as well. Mm-hmm. Like I thought that's who I was. And like it just got to the point where it was no longer fun. It was no longer exciting. There was nothing good about it at all. And so I had to make the decision, like, is this something that I want to change? And I was like, yes, I want to change this. And it is probably one of the hardest things that anybody can do is getting sober, period. Yeah. And I remember just being so embarrassed about it, just kind of like I was like, in the closet again. Yeah. But I was like so scared and nervous of what everybody else thought about me. And then finally I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Like I am now sober and I have done some really stupid things in my life and I have really screwed up, and it has been plastered all over TV for everybody to witness.
Yeah.
And am I embarrassed about it? Absolutely not, because I know that other people know someone like I was. And if they can see me now to where I am just, I'm not Mr. AA where I like run around with the big book. I'm not, I'm just living a life that I find to be completely satisfying. And it may not be everybody's, idea of satisfying, but it is for me. But I believe that what I did with getting sober is, you can kind of put it towards anything, is if you really want to find out who you are, work through the process, whether it be with a therapist, whether it be with, self-help books or whatever, dig deep inside and let it out and be real and be honest and be emotional and vulnerable. And at some point you'll find a peace and comfort of like, I will never be a 6-pack supermodel. I will never be the best at anything, but I can be good at many things. I will never be perfect. And I do not have to pretend that Dr. Phil and my alcoholism didn't happen, because I'm not embarrassed about it. I'm proud that I got to where I am now. 7 years ago, I was literally driving around the country with all of my belongings in the back of my car, crashing on people's couches who would let me stay there as I would drink myself to death. And now I have a home. I have all of my family back in my life. I've got a wonderful husband, and I have my own business, and I've got friends who genuinely like me for who I am. And I wouldn't have believed that 7 years ago, but it's possible.
Wow.
So if someone's struggling and pride is a thing that, celebrate pride from a place.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And like just to note too, even for bouncing back to you, Grace, like just so one thing that that's so amazing even about this conversation and this podcast is like there are people who that will resonate with, and I think they might not even been expecting to hear that piece of advice from you, Todd. And I'm just like so happy at thinking back for myself to that I don't know, like 16-year-old or so kid who was like just meeting you through Survivor, like that you have like grown into the person you are and that things are the way they are. And so just like so freaking happy for you and thankful for you though, because like, sometimes it's just, I think part of it's too, like, if you hear something from one person, it might not land, but if you hear something from the right person, it does. And, you are the right person for a lot of people, right? Just thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot.
I mean, yeah, it's so interesting because the way we've asked, like, how you're celebrating Pride, and I do feel like that. Yeah, I could feel like that. That it's like, oh, am I celebrating the right way? I think, like being queer, there's so many ways to celebrate Pride, and that doesn't have to be through the official Pride Week. Go do whatever you want. Watch some queer, watch Heartstep or Love Simon. I know in Toronto they've done a really. There's I think Sober Oasis is specifically Pride programming for people who are recovering. So like you search for it, it's out there. Hopefully. If it's not, go create it. I think
well, I will say, speaking of creating things, so this is something like you, Todd, you mentioned like working to find yourself, and I keep flashing back in my head to the Talking with T-Bird interview. I love T-Bird so much. I just want to say, like, you, I know in the past you've talked about kind of like your, your dad and his journey, which kind of in part led him to like restoring phonographs, which part of what you do is like your own creative artistic journey with Funko Pops. I just want to like especially make sure we touch on the Funko frenzy, the Funko frenzy that you're creating. But like how many Funko Pops overall have you created to date, and just like what does that mean to you to be able to make those and have your own business doing that? Todd's Pop Shop, doing that each and every day.
Okay, first of all, it's really awesome. I didn't know I was a creative person. That was something I discovered, and I'm grateful I did. So yeah, I make Funko Pops for a living. It's amazing. And I've made about 3,600.
Oh my gosh.
Whoa. Yeah, 3,600. I've done it for a little over 3 years, which is wild. I mean, it's my full-time job, and it's amazing. But I get to be creative. I literally get to build and make someone into a toy. And so, like, that is another thing that I will say, like, that has made me appreciate people and who they are, and like their spirit and their soul. Because if you're ordering a pop of yourself from me, it is my job to make it you. And so I love it when people will write me a story as to what they love, what they like, who they are, because then I get to try to create that into a little figure. And the reactions are my favorite. And because if I get it right, then I'm capturing them and all of their beauty, because I feel like everybody is beautiful in one way or another. Like we all are special people and souls, and nobody should be not denied their, what makes them special.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I love making my, like these custom Funko Pops, and I will keep doing it as long as people keep wanting them.
I saw you made the Nicaragua immunity idol recently. That's amazing. That's so good. That's so good. If anybody doesn't check it out. Todd's Pop Shop on Instagram.
I've made every idol.
Every idol.
Oh my gosh.
All of them. Yeah. Every single one. So
that's a lot. That's a lot.
It's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
I think we normally love to as we said on the Pride Has Spoken, it's an opportunity to celebrate you, but like to sort of give you the last word in terms of what do you want to say to probably specifically like LGBTQ fans of Survivor and your fans, and what message would you want to leave with them?
Oh man, to my my fellow beautiful queer people out there who I love and adore dearly, you are special, you are important, you matter. I may not know you in the slightest bit. I may not have spoken to you once, but I love you because you matter. And I want anybody out there who is scared, sad, lost, alone, to know that they are not alone. You can reach me online. I respond. Like, I will respond. If I don't respond, it's literally because you probably sent it somewhere. Not me. So, because I literally respond to everything. It may not be right away, but I will. But you're not alone and you are loved. But the most important thing is never, ever, ever forget that there is something inside of you that makes you so special, so unique, and so important. And nobody can take that away from you. And if someone is trying, they do not belong in your life. So hold on to what makes you special and just remember to love people for who they are.
All right, we are back. We have interviewed Todd in another time and space. Spoilers, we haven't done it yet. But I think that's it from us here at the Pride Has Spoken. Another month. We'll be back in a year's time to do more, I'm sure.
Maybe sooner by
maybe
our
sooner.
track record. Yeah.
So once again, make sure you get your Pride Has Spoken t-shirts. Make sure you use the hashtag The Pride Has Spoken. If you get a t-shirt, take a picture of it, send it to us. Let's see, promote it. And of course, all the proceeds from that will go to the Fuck Bands Leave Queer Kids Alone fundraising efforts. I think that's it.
Wait. Since it's the last day of Pride, should we each say what our favorite thing we did this Pride month was?
Okay.
Yes,
and
I should.
I can go first.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can go first. Yeah.
Well, I had an amazing time at Boston Pride a few weeks ago, but then last weekend I was in New York for New York Pride and spent Sunday at Jacob Riis Beach, which has a whole like part of the beach that is like the queer section and has been for years. And it was so fun and joyous and just like so many people. And a lot of people with various degrees of like tops off and things like that, and like seeing different people's bodies and genders. And it was just really special and queer and amazing. And I was there with people I really love, and it was awesome. And queer love, queer joy, best month of the year, you know?
Yeah. Toronto has the Trans Pride March is on Friday nights of Pride weekend. So it was last Friday. The weather was rainy and not fun, and yet Toronto had its biggest trans march ever.
Hell yeah.
More people than ever before, which I talk a lot on this podcast. We talk a lot about like American legislation because it's so pervasive and happening so much in the United States. But in New Brunswick recently, there was a motion put forth by I think one of the ministers of education. I think the minister of education. I might have that wrong. Where essentially he just like unprompted changed some of the policy that they had, in which you can't call a kid. Sorry, you can't use a child's prefer like their name and pronouns unless you out them to their parents. And so a bunch of different stuff. And this is in New Brunswick. So, I talk about Canada being progressive, but there's, it's seeping transphobia is, happens everywhere. And so a bunch of actually the cabinet in New Brunswick actually we're gonna quit if you don't change the policy. They've not yet changed the policy, but all that to say that like despite that that happening, Toronto had its biggest trans march ever. So in the rain, and so I just wanted to celebrate. It was so fun. It was great. It's amazing. That was probably my highlight of Pride Month for me.
Ooh, yeah. And I mean, I would just jump in and say, DC Pride was a good time. But the thing that really jumps out to me, and thanks, Evvie, for asking that question, is all Pride Month, really, throughout the month, I've been for my job, working at a climate nonprofit where I interview people. Like I've been interviewing 11 people working on climate change solutions and doing different work. And what's been really cool about that, not only is my work, and it's a series called Drawdown's Neighborhood, if people want to check that out at drawdown.org/neighborhood, where there are 37 episodes online to date, like all featuring people of color. And I think like that's easy for me to be very intentional about, but then to also be like, hey, could you like get us some queer people to feature is like a little bit more complicated in work settings and like all that. But what's been awesome this month has been just like the fact that of the 11 people that I've been able to interview, episodes to come out this fall, like there have been multiple queer people and like non-binary people, and just to have that representation there means so much. And to actually be able to talk about like queerness and then like make something that's about climate change, but then like actually about race and like queerness and identity, like explicitly, that's kind of been the highlight for me, is just like those stories, and excited to share those.
You told me it was when you saw Kit Connor and Joe Locke from Heartstopper. And
oh my God. Stop it.
That's what you told me was the best
No,
part.
that was like a high and a low at the same time, because I saw like the UK float going by, and I was like, what is going on here? Like, what are they doing? That float's not even queer. And I was just like rolling my eyes, looking away. I can't wait for them to pass by. Where are the beads, right? And then someone who I was with like pointed out to me, they're like, oh, aren't those the guys from Heartstopper? And they were just on the back of the float.
Show waving. You podcast about, man.
And I fumbled to get my phone and like barely got a picture of them. I'm so sad that they were in my city. If you're listening, Kit and Joe, I'm actually
sure
pissed at you. I'm pissed at you for not saying, hey, like you were in my city, and you just kind of like ghosted me. So that was awesome and horrible at the same time, because I would have like definitely jumped on that float. Another highlight, though, I have to say.
Highlight. Yeah.
Love it.
Is that it? Is that Pride? Is that Pride Month?
I think so.
Wave our flags, everybody. Wave your flag.
Well, we'll give a big thank you to Carla, Hi, Missy, and Todd for all taking time out of their schedules to do this pod. I want to thank you, Matt and Evvie, as well, for bringing us to life once again. And thanks everybody who listened, because we appreciate it. So yeah. Is that it? Hashtag the Pride is spoken. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Grace, like, where could the people find you, follow up with you, all the things?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Hi from Grace. So everything I'm doing, podcast a lot about scripted TV. So check me out there. What about you, Matt?
Oh my gosh. Well, I have to do all the plugs. So Wrestling or Hap Up, I plugged it already early on in the conversation. But we had a very great episode that was Pride themed a few weeks back. If you want to check that out, if you're a pro wrestling fan, really proud of that conversation. There's Pod Friends, where I've interviewed both Evvie and Grace and other people who are queer and not queer. robiswebsite.com/podfriendsfeed. And I feel like there are other things I could plug. I'm probably going to forget something, but I do want to plug Survivor Philadelphia for all the Survivor fans out there who want to play a game of Survivor, or if you know anyone who wants to, like, casting is now open. bit.ly bit.ly/sp3 casting is the application, or you could just go to Survivor Philly on social media or message me, as some people have thankfully done, to let me know you're applying. Let me know. It's happening in September. I'm like super excited for that. Especially just like what I mentioned with my experience. We are there's not going to be anyone who's the one, person of color or one of a couple of people of color. There's not going to be anyone who's like the one out queer person. And I'm really proud to help like ensure that and create something that we could really be proud of. And speaking of people I'm proud of, Evvie, where could people find you? What are you up to?
All right. Well, I am on Twitter and Instagram at Evvie Jagoda. I am also at TikTok with the same handle. It is still hacked, but I'm several emails into conversation with TikTok support. So I think it's gonna happen. I think we're gonna get it
by midnight. Basically, before Pride Month ends.
Right. If you haven't checked out my podcast series about the Queer Ultimatum on the Married at First Sight or the Reality Wrap Ups feed, take a listen to that. That was a really fun time. If you haven't listened to season 1 of The Pride Is Spoken, where I interviewed Bryce, Zeke, Lyrsa, Amy, and Ty, and Ricard. Wow, it's so many.
Yeah.
And also there was a panel of also queer RHAP podcasters. You should definitely take a listen to that.
Yeah.
And is there anything else? I was on an episode of the Survivor Now podcast. That was really fun. And yeah, I think that's it. If you live in Boston, I'm gonna be at an event at Aeronaut Brewery on July 8th. It was supposed to have happened already, but it got rescheduled because of rain. And I think there's still tickets available. Oh. And there may or may not be a special guest from Survivor 44 there. Hint, no. They live in Boston.
I'm sweating.
And are really cool and fun. And you'll just have to come to the event to
that is like oddly specific, but also vague. So
yeah,
who knows?
I think there is only one person,
like one person
who lives in Boston.
But, no, that's awesome. And yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if you plugged at Evvie Jagoda. I also at Matt Scott GW, at Hi from Grace. Anything else? I don't want to end this podcast.
I can't believe I didn't make. I was too nervous to make a at Hi from Grace when we interviewed Hi. I was too nervous.
That's good. though.
No,
I know. I did it now.
Yeah. Oh,
nice.
Wow. You got it before it's too late.
Well, happy Pride Month to everybody out there. Until next time, the Pride has spoken.